Tonight on Closer Look, if you aren't from Australia, likely the only time you've heard of Vegemite would be from the lyrics of the former #1 song Down Under by the group Men at Work. That song hit the top of the charts in February of 1983. Fast forward 42 years and Vegemite is popular again, at least at one Toronto café. Toronto Today reporter Catherine Manny is here with the latest. Catherine, first, for those who don't know, can you describe what Vegemite is?
Right, yeah. So Vegemite is a yeast-based spread. So it's got a really dark brown color and quite a pungent flavor to it. I've spoken to a couple Australians for this story, and even they admit that it can be a bit of an acquired taste. But for Australians, they say it's a taste of home for them. It's an iconic Australian breakfast spread that lots of Aussies like to enjoy on a piece of buttered toast.
Yeah, no, I've heard some Australians actually refer to it as their version of what we would call peanut butter. Okay, so Catherine, take us back 3 months. What happened that had Leighton Walters, the owner of Found Coffee, on the verge of having to get rid of $8,000 worth of the Australian spread?
Right. So it all started with a routine inspection from the CFIA, Canada's Food Inspection Agency. Leighton Walters is an importer of Vegemite himself, and he told me that he imports Vegemite because he wants to keep costs low for the Australian expat community in Toronto. It can be quite expensive to buy Vegemite in Canada, so he imports it himself. And the CFIA flagged his imports of Vegemite and wanted to inspect it. Basically, they found that Vegemite has added vitamins in it, added B vitamins, including folate, which can be important for, protecting a person's health. We have a number of products in Canada that are fortified with added B vitamins, including, cereals and pastas and all that kind of stuff. So Canada has regulations around what kinds of products are allowed to be fortified with vitamins. And Vegemite, unfortunately, did not make the cut. Vegemite is not on that list of products that are allowed to be fortified. So the CFIA flagged this, and they said to Leighton Walters, the owner of Found Coffee in Toronto, that your Vegemite is non-compliant. They said that because there's added vitamins in Vegemite, that it didn't follow Canadian food regulations, and so Leighton Walters was ordered to remove all of the Vegemite from his cafes. He would sell it on the shelves by the jar, and he also had a couple menu items that included Vegemite. So he was ordered to stop selling it, remove it from his shelves, and he was told over the phone that he had to eventually destroy that $8,000 stock of Vegemite that he had imported. So obviously very distressing for Walters and for the Australian expats in Toronto.
Yeah, so just to be clear, Catherine, it's not that the CFIA banned Vegemite. To your point, it's the added vitamins that made them non-compliant. So what do you think prompted the agency to reverse its decision?
Right, yeah. So in the end, this story really blew up. It was covered a lot in Toronto media. It was covered extensively in Australia. Leighton Walters told me that he did over 40 media interviews after we broke the story. And so it landed at the Australian Prime Minister's desk. And so Anthony Albanese, the Australian Prime Minister, ended up speaking about this issue in a press conference in Australia. And eventually that led to some discussions between Australian trade officials and Canadian government officials. And I do believe that this is what moved the needle for the CFIA, because, the CFIA were really digging in their heels when they were talking to Leighton Walters saying, we're not banning Vegemite, but your Vegemite is non-compliant because of these added vitamins. It's important to note that all Vegemite, according to the producer's website, has added vitamins. So this was potentially going to lead to potentially enforcement actions against all kinds of Vegemite imported across Canada. So it really became like a flashpoint between Canada and Australia. And I think what really expedited that process was Australian trade officials speaking with, the Prime Minister's office, with Global Affairs Canada. Leighton Walters told me that the, High Commissioner of Australia got involved. So it really became quite a political flashpoint. And I think that is what eventually moved the needle and got the CFIA to order a health assessment of Vegemite. And so after they ordered this health assessment led by Health Canada, they found that the risk of having added vitamins in Vegemite was low, a low risk to human health. So after that, the CFIA decided that they were going to work with Leighton Walters in the short term to allow him to continue selling Vegemite in his cafe while they hash out kind of plans for longer term Vegemite sales.
So, Catherine, you talk about how big this story really did get, and the story highlights the role of local and international advocacy. Can you expand on how the Australian government and local Toronto community collaborated to support Walters? Were there any pivotal moments in these efforts?
I think one of the most pivotal moments happened early on in this story when Leighton Walters made a video on the Found Coffee Instagram page, kind of just letting his customers know the reason why they couldn't find Vegemite on the shelves anymore. And this really sparked a lot of outrage in the Australian expat community in Toronto. And it led to Leighton Walters connecting with this marketing professional, Ray Woods. Ray is an Australian expat himself. He had never known Leighton Walters before this, but because Vegemite is such an important, iconic cultural product to Australians, he felt like he needed to help. And so he reached out to Leighton Walters and he used his marketing prowess to start kind of drumming up attention to this story. And that's how it landed on my desk. I found out about this story through Ray. And then I worked on my story with Leighton. But it's really interesting how, these two people who had never been friends before, had never really met, kind of connected on this issue in order to save Vegemite in Canada, really. So that was a pivotal moment early on. And then after that, Leighton's neighbors and friends continued to drum up a lot of support for him, and to keep this kind of movement going to save Vegemite, until it ended up on the desks of the Prime Minister of Australia and the Prime Minister of Canada.
And the Australian Prime Minister framed this as a cultural victory as much as a regulatory one. How significant do you think this story was in terms of national identity and the connection between food and culture?
Yeah, I don't think that can be understated. Something that both Leighton Walters and Ray told me was that this idea of banning Vegemite in Canada, or at least restricting the sale of Vegemite in Canada, would be akin to Australia banning Canadian maple syrup. It's really that embedded in the cultural identity of Australians. And there was also a little bit of controversy about whether or not the CFAA was going to ban Marmite, which is a really similar yeast-based spread, but comes from the UK. And so there was definitely this idea that there was a double standard between Marmite and Vegemite, and that this Australian product was being restricted while a British product was being allowed to be sold. So I think it definitely drummed up a lot of outrage because of how deeply proud Australians are for their culture, and Vegemite is part and parcel of that.
It certainly is good stuff. All right, so the next time you buy bread from a man in Brussels and you ask if he speaks your language, he may just smile and give you a Vegemite sandwich. Toronto Today's Catherine Manny. Thanks for this, Catherine.
Thanks so much, Scott.
That's all for Closer Look on this Tuesday. We'll be back tomorrow night at 7 with another edition for all of us at Village Media. Thanks for watching.